Hi everyone, I'm finally back and it seems to be that my computer seems to be working, so that's good news. Let's get started now. We'll be discussing today about consulting pricing, and the idea is really to get a sense of how consulting firms build their price and what it means for procurement, and how to negotiate pricing in particular in a smart way, right? The point is about that. So let's go. So I'd like to start with a quote that I particularly love, and I think this is so true, and in particular for consulting. It's from Warren Buffett. It's price is what you pay and value is what you get. You'll see that a lot of things that we talk about here are more about value than price per se, and we'll explain that. But I think that really explains the key message that we want to convey in most of our webinars, actually. So today we're going to discuss about consulting pricing and make sure that procurement understand what's behind it and how to negotiate, in particular, this price in the context of consulting, which is quite specific. So we'll discuss about how they price and what are the internal and external factors that shape these prices, how you negotiate better deals by focusing not only on price, actually, but on scope and deliverables and ROI, give you some actionable steps to challenge proposals and get the right price for your budget, but also your needs, and then, of course, insight into buying consulting. Even if you arrive late to the discussion, and you'll see we'll give you practical example. It's a real case, actually. It's a real story. So I think that brings value to the conversation. It's a simple one today. We'll discuss first how do consultants make money. Then we'll discuss how they build their price. And finally, we'll discuss about how to negotiate consulting pricing. And at the end, we'll open the floor for Q&A. If you have questions in the meantime, don't hesitate to share them in the chat. We'll be more than happy to answer, if that makes sense, when you write them. So don't hesitate to use the chat. There's two of us, so it's much easier to handle those questions as they come. Okay? Can everybody hear us? Is it clear? Sorry, and we can get started. Everybody's on board. Let's go.
Here we go.
Yep,
we can hear you, Ellen.
Sorry?
We can hear you. You can go ahead.
Okay, let's go. Okay, so just to introduce the two of us, my name is Hélène Lafitte. I'm the CEO of Consulting Quest, and we are specialized in buying consulting, from externalized consulting to consulting for consulting procurement, but also digital. And Laurent, who's here with me, is my co-founder. He's also my CTO, because we happen to have developed a SaaS for consulting services. Yeah, that was a very quick introduction to you, so you really understand where does all that information comes from. Okay, let's go to how do consultants make money. So I think that one essential thing to understand about consulting and profitability in consulting is to go back to what do consultants do actually? What they do is to sell their time and expertise, right? And the more efficiently they leverage that time and their expertise, and the more profitable the firm becomes. So it's all about billable hours, and then making sure that experience that they sell it at the higher cost possible, right? It's a shortcut, but more or less it's how it works. And then in that context, you can imagine that when you are managing a consulting firm and you have several consultants in your pool, really what is the key driver for you is to make sure that all your consultants are staffed. They have work to do and they're not idle. So that's why you see the way the consulting firm are structured with senior consultant and junior consultant, etc. Their goal is to staff them. I'm not talking about the partners, which are a little bit different, because a lot of their work is based on commercial and relationship. I'm really talking about the people that are on the ground, but this is how it works. And then it's a game between junior consultant and senior consultant having the right expertise on the field, but having also less expensive consultants in order to make all of this acceptable, both on the seniority side, but also on the average price size. So it's called that game, but it's mainly based on that utilization rate. That is a key KPI for consulting firms.
I agree. At the end of the day, if we make a parallel with, I don't know, the chemical industry, in the chemical industry, you build a plant that costs a lot of money, and then you need to fill it because you need to sell volumes that are coming out of this plant and maximize the utilization of the plant. In consulting, you don't build the plant, all the cost, I would say OPEX and less CAPEX, but the logic is the same. You need to have your teams as busy as possible, of course, on billable time.
So I'd like also to talk a little bit about the pyramid model in consulting. This is really key. Not all consulting firms work like that. I want to make that clear, but most of the big ones do. So that's interesting to understand how they organize and what it means for clients. So they usually have that pyramid model where they have those level of expertise with a lot of junior consultants that are really the ones that do most of the billable work. They do the analysis, they do the data gathering, and they bill at lower rates. Then in the middle, you have usually either senior consultants or managers or engagement managers or project manager, whatever you call them. Each consulting firm has a different name, but more or less it's the same thing. These are the people who manage the projects and the clients on a daily basis. And they bill a bit higher, and they are the ones who manage the junior consultants. And then on the top of your pyramid, you are the partners. The partners are usually only working a fraction of their time on the projects because most of their time is spent on business development and strategic oversight and relationship building, because all of this happens because they are able to build a relationship, build trust with the client, and then be able to sell. So that's very important because it's not only about expertise, it's also about rates. Because between a partner and a consultant, you can be a time 5 difference in terms of daily rates. So that's significant. But what is true as well is that as junior consultants are offered full-time on a project, partners are very rarely full-time on a project. Again, this is very true for very large firms. For smaller firms, you can find a model that is flatter, with consultants partners that are more present on the field and less junior consultants, but that's something that is quite consistent in the tier 1, tier 2 consulting firms, I would say. So now, how do they improve their profitability? Just to give a sense of what is happening today in the consulting market and that consulting firms do in order to improve their profitability. So the first thing that they do, and it's quite common, it's not new, is to try to lock in long-term projects or long-term relationships. They want to have steady revenues on big projects so they can cover fixed costs, they can reduce their commercial time. And this helps for them, it gives them some certainty in the next month and on the staffing part. And that's very important. We said before that utilization rate was a key KPI. Obviously, if they're able to say for the next 6, 9, or 12 months, my teams are staffed, then that's a good thing.
And if we take an example, when the firms calculate their daily rates, they usually base their daily rates on a number of days per year. Let's say 180 days per year or 200 days per year. Any day that is charged beyond that is pure profit. So if you have daily rates that's based on 180 days and you end up working 210, then you have 30 days of invoices that are pure profit because your entire business model is calculated on the 180. The other thing that you will find, it's in the long-term project, is the staffing. And is the fact that you will see, and that's the model of the largest firms, you will see teams that are pretty monolithic and that are coming with the same staff from day one to the end of the project. Whereas indeed, you could start with a small team, time to understand what's going on and gathering data and so on, then ramp up the team, then ramp down the team. But then it means that you have part of the team that is unused at the beginning and part of the team that is unused at the end. And if you have clients that are not paying attention to that, then you end up charging for the whole team, for the whole project. We saw that recently with Helen on a project where it was an SAP related, supply chain related project, where you had the architects that were charged on the project from the beginning to the end of the project, and you had the people that were in charge of the reception and the training that were there since day one with nothing to receive. And that's how they maximize the profitability. But that's something that can easily be spotted if you know where to look.
Yeah, absolutely. And another trend that we see is how a lot of consulting firms are trying to build some recurring revenue streams. So by essence, consulting is non-recurring, right? One project happens and then it stops, and they're not necessarily reasons to work again on the similar topics with a consulting firm. So what they're trying to do moving forward is to have some predictable income. So they're developing some subscription-based services or software services, or that type of thing are more predictable. Also, they can push to some services. We see that in particular in the what we call the hybrid consulting players, which are players that offer at the same time consulting and some other services. That the typical example is the big four, so KPMG, EY, etc. And so what they do is that they enter into a company through consulting, and then they make the relationship and they incentivize to get their client to buy some services. That one way to go, or they're just cross-selling across the organization. So that's something also that interesting, because that's how they improve their profitability. They're not always just there to sell a consulting project. And where we often see that in when they come into a new company and they say, oh, we're going to do that at a very interesting price, we're going to be like 50% discount, or sometimes they say, oh, we're going to do the first project for free. Don't be fooled. You know what they say, when it's free, you're the product. And that's a little bit like that. Is this not it's a bad thing, because sometimes it's an interest for both sides, but you have to be aware that there's something behind that. There is a reason why they're taking that risk. And the last part is value sharing model. That's also something that we see more and more now, where the consultants are willing to take some risks, put some of their fees at risk in order to have higher reward at the end. So that's something rather new, and that we start seeing also in the big consulting firm, which was not the case just 5 years ago. So it's rather recent, but it's still starting. And it's another way to boost their profitability, because at the end of the day, they're big machines where the risk they're taking is limited because they're big, and that risk is rewarded by higher fees, which means higher profitability. So that's also something that we see in the market. Okay, so now how do they build that price? So here, well, the idea is really to look at what is impacting those prices, what is behind the consulting price actually. So the first thing I wanted to share with you is what's the cost structure for a consulting firm. Of course, it's an average, it's based on research and available data, so that's my full disclaimer. But I think that I won't divulge any business secret in saying that the wages, the salaries for the consultants is really the main cost center for a consulting firm, right? And it links to what we said before, saying that the utilization of those consultants was really the key to achieve profitability, because that's really the big part of your costs. Of course, you have the overhead, and you have marketing, and you have admin, and a bit of IT, but that wages are very big. The point here as well is to see that in smaller firms, one of the reasons why smaller firms are able to have lower costs as well is because they have less of those overhead admin and marketing fees, because often the partners have several hats and they are at the same time partner, selling partner, delivering partner, but also they can be head of marketing, or they can be head of finance at the same time. That's why they're able often to have lower overhead costs. And so that's why we always push the idea that what they're looking for is often visibility and staffing their teams, because that's how they can cover a majority actually of their fixed costs, right? But now let's think about what is really driving the price of a consulting project. So we talked about the pricing of consultants, of a consulting firm, what's behind that. But now let's look at what is driving consulting fees in the project. So there are two types of consulting fees, two types of factors. Some factors are external, meaning external to the project we're discussing about, and some are absolutely linked to the project. What is not linked to the project is the industry the project is about, the consultancy that you're bringing to the table, where the project is happening, and how the market is doing at that time. So what do we mean by that? We mean that all industries don't pay the same thing for the same projects. Some industries have the advantage, I would say, to pay less than others. And it can be a significant difference. I won't say something extraordinary in saying that financial services and pharmaceuticals, for instance, are known to be quite lucrative industries for consultants, as opposed to manufacturing or chemicals, for instance.
I can share a personal example. When I was in consulting, I was leading the practice for organizational transformation with one of the largest players, one of the top 10. And I was working mostly in the industry, aerospace, chemicals, and so on. But when I moved to New York to lead the business for North America, I ended up teaming up a lot with our financial services practice. And as I did not have any contacts, there was almost a tax that other partners were taking on the projects, where they were snatching half of the value of the projects for having made the introduction, which was a bit frustrating. But at the end of the day, I realized that they were charging twice what I was charging in the industry. So they were taking 50% of it, but we were charging twice. So at the end, I was charging the same thing as what I would have charged in the industry. And for me, it was okay because they were bringing the clients. Just all this to say that the guys in financial services, for the exact same project I would have done on optimizing the organization, standardizing the organization, and so on, were paying twice what I would have charged in the industry.
Yeah. And it's you have also differences that is quite known as that a premium consulting firm will be more expensive than a boutique that's not new. What is not always known is that depending on where you buy consulting, you won't pay the same prices. For instance, in the US, consulting is significantly higher than in Europe. It's about 20 to 30% higher. Middle East also has higher price than in Europe, while Asia has lower prices. So that's also something that can impact the price of your consulting project. The last part is what we call consulting market dynamics. So here what we're saying is that it really depends also on the offer and the demand on the consulting market. When you are in a period where consultants are busy, they'll be more expensive than times where, well, they have people that are idle, and they can do significant discounts and efforts when they need to staff their team. Going back to what we were saying before, that the main cost for a consulting firm comes from the people, their consultants, so they need to staff them as much as possible. And sometimes when the market is a little bit loose and they need to cover the cost, they might offer some interesting pricing. And you can end up in that period by chance, right? But that's something that also can impact dramatically the price that they put on the table.
If I take the same metaphor on the chemical industry, What you need is to keep your resources busy.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, you don't mind giving a discount to make sure that you fill your plant, which is keeping the resources busy in the consulting industry. But what you do afterwards is to optimize your profitability. You will progressively replace the clients that are paying a low price with clients that are paying a higher price. So when you push too hard on the consultants to get the lowest possible price, you need to be aware of the fact that you will also be the lowest priority on the day they have to make an arbitration between clients. One element that is not mentioned here voluntarily to keep it simple is that, of course, clients, consultants that are preaching value pricing to their own clients tend to think about the value as well when they are charging a project. What Hélène is presenting here is a kind of a minimum amount of money that they need to make when they are selling a project. But of course, the dimension, which is, okay, I'm working on a post-merger integration that will yield 18 billion, 500 million in synergies. I don't mind asking for 20 million for this because this is not even 10% of the savings.
No, absolutely. And I think that's what I was mentioning in the previous slide in saying value sharing. That's something we see more and more, where they look more at the willingness to pay than the cost plus margin perspective. And that's something that we see more now. The internal factors are really linked to the project. It's based on how large your project is in terms of where do I need to intervene, how many people do I need, how many geographies do I need to have here, what's the complexity of that project, what capability I need, depending on the type of capability that you need. If it's strategy or operations or ESG or HR, the prices will be different. You won't have the same consultant in front of you. You should not have the same consultant in front of you.
And when you're dealing with a very large firm, one of the external factors that is also an internal factor is the fact that consultants that are specialized in some industries tend to make more money than some consultants that are in some other industries or in some capabilities that are more commoditized. So the capability part was mentioned. The industry part is also in play. When I was speaking about financial services earlier, as they were benchmarking the salaries of the consultant with the same salaries in the banking industry. In banking, you tend to make more money than the industry as an engineer. You have the same impact when you're looking at the consultants, depending on the industry, their cost might be higher. And then as they are looking at a markup above the salary of the consultant, here we go, the industry is also a key element.
Absolutely. Another element is the seniority. That's not new. The more senior, the more expert, the higher the price. That's classic. The staffing. By staffing, we mean what is the mix you have on the field between junior and senior and expert and partner. This also is driving the price. How long will last your project? And then one element that is not always seen considered, it's the depth of work. So what do we mean by that? Is that there's several ways to do consulting. For the same project on paper, you may have dozens of different proposals that answer that question. And so you have the high level, which is what we could call study and recommendations. So it's very high level. That's what you see typically in the very well-known strategy firms. Then there's a middle ground, which is co-construction with the client. So it's a hybrid team between the consultant and the client. And then there's the last part, which is do for you. And so you don't see that on all the capabilities, you don't see that in all the projects, but this is the two parts of the spectrum here. And obviously, when you do study and recommendation, the part done by the clients is much higher than when you have consultants that do for you, right? And that impacts the price. So when you look at a proposal, on the same RFP, you might have different models that are here. And I'm not saying here that one is better than the next. I'm just saying that one fits better your style, your work style, your bandwidth and everything. And it will definitely impact the price because you'll see that some have larger teams than others. That often comes from that depth of work and the granularity of what they will be doing for you. Okay, so that's very important. And that is a big driver for the price of a consulting project. So now, so I try to do something to explain a little bit and give some numbers. So just bear with me. This is Europe. This is not completely, it's just an example, but the idea is here to show you that the price of a consulting firm, the rate, they change along many factors. But two factors that are very obvious are, in one direction, the type of consulting firm that you're looking at, and the other direction, the type of consulting that we're looking at. I think that if we go on let's start with the easy one, right? The consulting firm. We go from boutique to mid-tier specialist to top-tier global, right? We know that the top tier are often more expensive than boutiques. I'm not like divulging anything crazy here. What is interesting as well, that you'll see also a lot of differences between type of consulting that are more strategic. So we're talking about strategy, M&A, that kind of work, down to operational, such as ESG or operational excellence or lean management. And so the whole point is here that the goal is to look at that and say and think, what's the best choice for me in that case for my project? And I have this exact same matrix that is based on exposure and type of consulting firm, exposure or visibility and type of consulting firm, to show what type of consulting firm you should work with based on if you have board exposure or if you're just like a department project. What is important here and what I want to convey is that the price of a project can vary tremendously based on who you work with and what type of project you're doing. And you cannot, there's two key takeaways, if you will. One is that you cannot think that a strategy firm, and I'm giving that example on purpose because we know they are everywhere, will come and offer a cost-effective proposal on a very operational project. That's not true. They cannot, because their prices and their costs internally are way too high to offer such interesting prices. And the case is that actually they have now operational consulting firms that are subsidiary of the big ones. I have two examples that I've seen recently. One is Orphos. I don't know if you've heard about them. Orphos is the PMO subsidiary of McKinsey. And then you have Proxima, for instance, which is the procurement subsidiary of Bain. Both those companies exist because of this, because you cannot offer competitive pricing with the McKinsey or Bain consultants on more operational work. And that's why they have that strategy to acquire smaller specialized firm, and they keep the brand actually in order to really show the difference. So they're still a bit more expensive than the others, but they try to play on the two on those two dimensions.
You could mention Inverto,
yes,
which is the procurement from BCG. I can speak from experience on some acquisitions we made when I was in consulting maybe 15 years ago, where we were acquiring companies that were very good, doing some operational excellence work with mid-size, mid-market companies. And we are trying to move them under our brand and to increase the pricing to the pricing that we were using. And they were pretty much losing all their clients. And 2 years later, most of the partners were gone because their earnouts had passed, and they were restarting a company to continue to work with their clients that had left because they were horrified by the pricing. So I think that at least keeping the brand and keeping some market positioning consistent makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that it comes also from a lot of clients now that realize that working with premium price consultants for more operational work doesn't make sense. There's some more awareness about what the market is about. And I think also there's more pressure on the prices. So you cannot say, okay, I don't care, we need to do it. Now say, yeah, we need to do it, but that's pricey though. Maybe the difference. So now let's talk about daily rates, because that's the thing. And we have very often discussion on that topic with our clients to try to explain why it's interesting, but this is not the alpha, the omega of consulting pricing. Because the real thing that matters actually is the total cost that you'll get and the impact that you can get from a project. So we give like those three examples and say, okay, we have the same project, and obviously we have one of the consultants that is on average much more expensive than the others. But the thing is, when they do the project, they do it faster because they put on the field a senior person and two consultants. And therefore, they're able to do it faster and to really generate a lot of impact. So the ROI is very good. But if you look only at the price, they are the more expensive. But if you go to the other two, and let's go to the less expensive, and we say there's two juniors on the field. They're less expensive on an average daily rate. They take a bit more time. They're way less expensive. But the problem is that they don't deliver. So at the end of the day, what is the best option? Is it the lower daily rate, or is it the one that brings you most like net impact minus cost? It's what you will get at the end of the project. So I think that's a mindset to have when you look at that, is that it's not only about the price, it's also about what you can expect from a project. And I know it's hard because here we take an easy example where we have like monetary impact that we can measure, and that's not always the case. But it's just changing the way you look at a proposal and think, do I think that they can make it and that can bring me that? Or do I think that I'll go like a half-baked impact? Or do I trust them to do it? And that should be one of those drivers. And price is just one component to that. Of course, you cannot accept just anything, but sometimes, and I'll say it and I won't say it twice, working with a big firm that has excellent experts on a specific project that's right into their expertise is the right option. It's just a matter of working with the right people, and it's all about what you can get out of that project and less about how much money you're going to spend on it. Would you agree on that?
To say this could be to say that when the stakes are very high, meaning that when you can capture a lot of value, the driver should be the quality of the team and the impact. Doesn't mean that you cannot optimize, make sure that the staffing is right, make sure that the duration is right, make sure that the percentage of value sharing is correct, and so on. But the impact will always trump the savings, the 10 or 20% even of savings that you can get on the cost. When we are looking at low return projects, I don't know, organizing a seminar or something like this, then the cost of the consultants might make a significant difference because the impact will not have the same elasticity.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and I think that there's also an element that we're not mentioning is the timing. Sometimes being able to launch your project earlier and not spend too much time on negotiating when you know that each week is costing you non-action, that can be also a driver in your negotiations. I don't know. Okay, so now how to negotiate the price?
I can give an example on that one. When we were working on the optimization of the A350 program for Airbus, the cost per year of the program development is 2 billion, which means that if you save 1 week, you save 40 million. So if you spend 3 months discussing in committees about what consultants you want to work with, you have just lost, let's say 12 times 40, about 500 million. So it's great that you saved a couple of $1 million on the back of the envelope, but you just lost the company 500 million. The thing is, nobody knows in the company that just lost 500 million because a lot of people don't count like this. But when you step back and you look at the stakes versus the savings, we always need to be aware of this.
Yeah. So one thing that is very important is to understand when you negotiate on the project, where's the value really during a project? And so here we go a little beyond just the scoping that we start before. And we start before because we ask ourselves, should we launch this project now? Does it make sense? And does it make sense to do full externally with consultants? So that's your first step. Then the second step, obviously the one where you have the most leverage in terms of final price, it's scoping. Do we need everything here? And what do we need exactly? What is the strict necessary that we need? And that's really where you can make a difference. Then the next step is sourcing. Who do we bring to the table? And that doesn't mean that you only work with smaller firms. And I've heard some large companies say, oh, now we don't work with big ones anymore at all. I don't think that's always the right option. I think that there's a healthy mix of big, small, and medium, and that's all about expertise and less about size per se that you should be looking for. But sourcing is also a key step. Bringing the right consulting firm to the table, bringing consulting firm that help you move the lines when you have established incumbents that tend to think that everything will be easy for them to win a project and don't always make the effort on the prices anymore. And that negotiations and selection is actually the lowest in terms of value that you can do. Actually, it's hard to negotiate just the price. It's hard because you don't have many levers, and the consultants have very often the upper hand in that negotiation.
And if I can give some kind of color to this, an example on the project scoping, sometimes the consultant can help you. Meaning that I remember a project where we were brought in because the client could not afford what the consultants were asking for. And we ended up having a conversation with the consultant, open conversation, saying, hey, the client cannot afford what you're proposing. And the consultant said, yeah, but they are buying too much. So what do you mean buying too much? They were looking for acquisitions, and there were 12 different segments, and only 2 were making sense for the company, according to the consultant. But nevertheless, the strategic guy wanted to analyze the 12 just in case, which means that they were asking the consultant to analyze 12 things. Only 2 of them were making sense, which meant that they were analyzing 10 things for nothing, which of course was exploding the price. And by just discussing with the consultant and then having an interesting conversation internally to convince the head of strategy that maybe we should reduce, maybe not do 12, maybe do 4, just to give some concession and not completely lose face. We ended up saving, 40%? Because this was not the only thing we were doing, but this was a significant saving that was brought in by the consultant himself.
Yeah, absolutely. So the things that you can actually negotiate, it's all of this. So the first thing is staffing. So who are the people on the proposal and when do they work? On what phases? What does make sense? Then what kind of delivery setup? So here we say we have full-time, part-time, we have the level of support you need, on-site, remote, all of this can impact your work. And we talk a lot about offshore, onshore. The last one is like near shore, mid shore. But all of this also can impact the price tremendously. So you really need to think about what makes sense for you. Sometimes it doesn't make sense that you bring the consultants on premises. Sometimes it really makes sense that they're here. So that's something that is important. The approach as well is key. As Laurent, the example Laurent was giving is exactly that. The approach there was, we want to start with 12, then 5, then 2. And if you just do 4, then 2, then you just immediately reduce the scope and you immediately reduce the price. So that's also something that's quite important. The next part, it's also about how many workshops do I do? How many people do I interview? Do I need to interview everybody in the company? Do I need to have like working sessions, 3 working sessions per department? Or can we do with 2? All of this will reduce the price, and when you add up everything, it can be significant.
And it's impacting the scope. It's also impacting, as a consequence, the duration.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
as we have seen, it's people multiplied by a daily rate multiplied by a number of days. So if you can act on any of those items, reduce the number of people, reduce the number of days,
Exactly.
reduce the average daily rate, then you get an impact.
Absolutely. And the last one in terms of scoping is everything about the granularity of the analysis, the level of detail that you want, the functional depth, and the number of deliverables. So if you're able to simplify a little bit what you need or go a bit higher level than that, then also, as Laura was mentioning, less time on the project, less expensive. That's that simple. And then there are other mechanisms that can help you decrease the price. One is leverage competition. That's also about market knowledge, but it's also bringing the right people on board. So you're pressuring pricing and making sure that they give you their best offer. One element is also discount and rebates. And it's something that you need absolutely to try, because you may be in a situation where the market dynamic is in your favor. And the consultant will be more receptive to that kind of thing. So you need to try. I think that's the only thing, like just,
Especially when you're looking at full year engagements. Because
yes.
as Hélène was mentioning earlier, the daily rates are calculated based on estimated number of days of utilization per year. As soon as you're above that, it's pure margin for them. So why not have some value sharing on the margin that is on top and say, hey, I give you this example, you have calculated 180 days, it's going to be 217 because it will work full year. So you have an extra 37 days per consultant that will be pure margin for you. Why don't we share that? And you say that you shave 20 days of consultant for each consultant times the number of consultants times the daily rate. It's close to a 10% discount that you will get just on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last one is not necessarily something that make decrease the price per se, because usually value sharing projects are a tiny bit more expensive because you exchange certainty against higher prices. So what the idea behind that is that you will commit to less upfront, and the rest of the price will be based on results. It means that you are taking less risk with that project. And it's particularly interesting when you're not sure of the outcomes and you'd rather not commit too much, or you have to convince your leadership that it makes sense, and you don't want to have to that are fees that are too high. But if then you have results and you have savings, for instance, then it'd be much easier to pay the rest to the consultants, because the money will be there and the effort and the impact will be there. So all these are elements that you can negotiate when you discuss with consulting firm on a proposal.
You can look at it from a risk standpoint.
Yeah.
And you can also look at it from a budget standpoint. Let's assume you can afford only a certain amount of money as a fixed fee. You could say, hey, I'm okay to give you this as a fixed fee to de-risk you in that case. And the rest will be based on results, which is then aligning the incentives for both the consultants and the company, because the consultant will be incentivized to deliver the results to get a higher fee.
And if you are able to have money, then you'd be able to pay the rest of the fees. Absolutely.
As we were focusing on the fees, there are some elements that are on the expenses that we have not mentioned here. We have some articles on our website that you can check, but this is also something that's linked to the delivery setup, or that's linked to some practices that were acceptable in the past, such as I charge you 6% for administrative expenses that are not acceptable anymore, and that you can easily challenge.
Or we went on long-term project where they add a little line to say that in the middle of the project they will actualize all their fees by 3% because salaries increase, and that's the consulting index, and that's it. And I said, no, this is not something, and you just put that in your cost, don't put that in line in the bottom hidden. It's a real story. We've seen that in a proposal in the past. But sometimes we arrive late and the proposals are already on the table. And I say a realistic case because that's a real case that has happened very recently. So what do you do in that case? And I think that it goes a bit with what Laurent was sharing before on the design to cost work that we did with that client in the past. But the idea is that the first thing you do when you have your proposal is to review all the deliverables with your client and make sure that, one, they have everything and they need everything, And then, are they not missing some other things? So it's the occasion to review the deliverables and make sure that we really understand what's behind that, and we're sure that this is what it is. The second thing is to push a little bit your clients to tell you what would feel reasonable for your stakeholders in terms of budget. Very often, they don't say anything, but if you push them a little bit, they'll tell you, oh yeah, 300K seems way enough for that project. Or I don't think that I can get more than X from my boss. And that should be the thing that you keep in mind to make sure that, you know, you fit into that budget or you don't fall too far away from that. Then when you have that, you can send the updated scope to the consultants and ask them for a revised proposal. You need to talk to them and explain the change and the depth and the project footprint. I think that a lot of people skip that part of explaining the RFP to the consultants and to spending a bit of time with them to answer their sizing questions. So the goal of these Q&As is for them to understand what are the boundaries of your project. I mentioned before that you can answer to the same RFP in tens of different ways. Yes, because all the elements that we mentioned before, the intensity of the work you need, the type of support you need, the level of granularity you need, the type of approach you need, all of this can be like slight different things, and that will impact the price, and that will impact how they do the work. And so usually in those Q&A sessions, what they do is to ask those questions. Do you need this? Is this included? Do you need change management? Do you need the? And that's how they will make the boundary and make it as close as possible to your needs. Also, something that is very powerful is after you have a Q&A, you do a recap and you share with all the providers so you level the playing field. And because the goal is not here, it's not an exam. It's not an exam where you're ranking exam and the best gets it all. No, this is not how it works. What you want is have several proposals to choose from. You need all of them to have answers that make sense and that you can pick just the one that is the best fit to you. So that's the other thing. And the last part of the work is to evaluate those new proposals and see, based on your deliverables and what was the original proposal and what your internal budget and what makes sense. So what I want to convey here is that it's not too late to, even when the proposals are already there and there has already been one round, you can still make it work. And just to give you a sense on the project that we talk about here, all that happened in 10 days. From the review to the deliverables down to getting the new proposal, we had a little more than 10 days. So it can be done fast, and it can be done very well. And what's the result that you get from there? You do have a new proposal, then you have three options. Either you are in line with your expectations in terms of both content and approach and prices, you're good. You can move forward. You're slightly over. Here, when you're slightly over, then there's room for negotiation, and that's where you dig into the staffing and the timeline and the phasing and the deliverables. That's where you can refine that. If you're way off, then it means that you have to take it another way. And the other way is what Laurent was mentioning, which is, okay, what's the budget really? Should we try fitting into that? And then you sit down with a consulting firm and you can't have 5 of them, but you can have 2 or 3 of them and say, look, this is my budget. What is the best offer, the more reasonable, the one that makes more sense, that fits into that budget? And you'd be surprised to see how collaborative they are and happy to offer something that really makes sense. And what's interesting beyond that is that you will be able to secure savings on those proposals, usually from 20 to 40%. That's our experience. We've done that over and over. But more than that, what you do here is that you give the consultants more certainty of what's happening, and they're usually quite happy to be in that situation. It's not an aggressive negotiation. It's never with consultants. And the truth is, they know their business more than you do. So you have to make it in a way that is very constructive and collaborative to really get them on board, so you have a win-win situation.
One of the key challenges being that you need to discuss with the consultants, but aligning on the deliverables and the kind of design to cost that comes with that is also a key success factor, and it requires internal alignment, which might be more difficult to achieve than
that's our experience. Okay, so we're done now. Are there any questions before we wrap up that we didn't answer, or things that you'd like us to talk about a little bit? We have, I think, a few minutes. We're a tiny bit late, but is there anything that you would like to ask us?
I was asked if you would share the presentation after.
Yes, I will. I will share the presentation to all the people present. And we will probably share as well the recording in a couple of days on the YouTube channel, if you want to see this again.
Other than that, I received some thank you messages that I transfer to you, Helen.
Okay, thank you. So just to wrap up, the consulting price is not something that is completely fixed. You can always shape how a project is scoped and staffed and delivered, and it will impact the price. Daily rates are only the starting point. What really matters at the end of the day, the ROI and the value that is delivered. You can negotiate way more than just a price. You should negotiate way more than just a price. Staffing, delivery, approach are all under discussion. And the last part is that even if you're late in the game, you have options, and you can always build a win-win deal if you can realign the project. And realign is really the term, is that get your internal stakeholders to align on what's really the need. That's it. Thank you all. I hope you had a great webinar and you had interesting insight out of it. If you need anything, you can contact us directly, and we're happy to discuss with you. But in the meantime, I hope that you have a very good end of your day. Bye-bye. Cheers.